I made a custom Dragon ground clamp for my welding machine that actually works. And you can make it using the most basic stuff that you can find in any local hardware store. Okay, so the first thing that I'm gonna do here is start to measure the ground clamp arms. I'm gonna see how long the pieces that I need to make have to be. And what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna make this thing out of 2 bolts. This is gonna save me having to make this or fabricate this out of material that I have here. And the idea or challenge of making this out of 2 bolts was actually really interesting to me. I'll tell you how I got the idea for that in a bit, hang on. So, step number 1, off to the hardware store. Just a nice little walk away from my house with my dog. At the hardware store, I'm looking through the different sizes that I have to work with here, and I settled on this size here. It is a 7-inch bolt. These are gonna be long enough to make the body of the clamp no problem. So now I need to design the shape that I want of the dragon head. I designed it on my iPad, sketching over a photo of the bolts here. You don't actually need a fancy iPad or drawing program to do this. You can literally just trace out the shapes on a piece of paper and follow along with what I'm doing here. I first tried to design something with their shape like this, but taking a look at it after the fact, I started thinking that it was gonna look a little bit too bulky looking at it from the side. And then looking at it from the top, the overall shape is gonna be way too skinny. So I actually got the idea to cut the bolts in half lengthwise, and then again cut it in half somewhere in the middle and flip the pieces around like this. Once they were together like this, I would put them each side by side. This is gonna allow me to make the shape a little less bulky overall. I would have the width that I wanted, and then the width is gonna give me much more to work with as well. As I go along, I design the shape around them, and again, this is just a rough sketch. But as I start to put it together, I'm actually starting to think that this is gonna look awesome. With a bit of an idea here, let's get cutting. I'm just laying out a line lengthwise to cut along here. This is gonna give me something to follow along with, and I'm gonna start with making the top half of the ground clamp here. What I'm doing here is I am using a brand new cutting disc on my angle grinder. For any bigger cutting projects that I'm doing, I only use brand new discs. Heavy cutting projects can put a lot of strain on the cutting disc that you are using. And to be completely honest, these things can explode in the blink of an eye. Make sure that we are wearing proper safety gear and a proper respirator at all times for working on this clamp. But hold on a sec here. For anybody who's not familiar, what exactly does a ground clamp need to do? Well, to put it simply, the most important thing that a ground clamp is gonna do for us, it's gonna be one really important part of the equation to connect our welding current through our workbench to our table to our welding machine. The current when we are welding is gonna travel from our machine, it's gonna travel through our torch lead to our workpiece, and then back through the ground lead to our welding machine via the ground clamp. For some processes, the direction of this current can actually be flipped in reverse. But this is just a general way of how the current works as far as the machine using the electricity it has to work on, and then how the current travels through something to create the arc that we use for welding. So I think you can see how important the ground lead is to everything that we do when we are welding. So why exactly am I replacing the original ground clamp for my machine that honestly works fine? Is there something wrong with it? Honestly, no, absolutely nothing. One day I was messaging with one of my students in my online TIG welding program, and we were trying to troubleshoot some problems that he was having with his TIG welding. He was doing some aluminum TIG welding and he was having some problems with some erratic starts. My student had asked if the ground clamp could be the source of some of the problems when the welds were starting up. Over the years of it being used for all kinds of stuff, it had developed a little bit of rust on it. Could this be the source of some of the problems? I asked, was it securely clamped to the workbench? Okay, is it relatively close to the welding area you're working in? Okay, is there any paint or any coating on your table that could interfere with the flow of your welding current? Okay, none of the important pieces of the ground clamp are missing. Okay, are all the actual contact surfaces of it clean? Okay, if all of the things on the checklist here have been ticked off, to be honest, either the ground clamp works or it does not work. Connection or no connection. These are the most important things that actually just need to be covered. I made a joke that if everything else was in order like we talked about, the body of the ground clamp could be made from 2 bolts for all I care, and it would still work just fine. Wait a second. And then I started looking at my ground clamp. It had been used for years with my machines in my shop here, but looking at it now, I had to stop and ask, why are you so boring? You could be bolts, a claw, a pretend sandwich, or a dragon head. So here we are. Okay, so with all the pieces of my bolts now cut and ready to go, here is the next most important thing that I'm doing here. What I'm doing here is I'm using a wire wheel to try and get some of the gross stuff off of the surface of the bolts. These are stainless steel bolts, but who knows what else could be on the surface of them. So I've made sure that I properly clean them with acetone. Anything that's on the surface is now gonna be removed, so we've done the best we can. Okay, so you can see here after I have the pieces cut how I'm going to arrange them to weld them together. I'm gonna position them so they are relatively straight. And then as I get ready to weld them here, I'm gonna start giving it good filler material right away with this one. Getting started with the actual weld here, take a look at this. Even though I decontaminated it, you can see how much this thing is smoking up with the stuff burning off of it. And it's a good thing that I'm using proper fume extraction as well as breathing protection. Now, because this is so contaminated or dirty, I'm giving it good filler material as much as possible. Good filler material is gonna help me to run along with this one, even though it is disgusting to weld. I'm gonna do my best with proper gas coverage, as well as really good post flow when I finish each pass. This is gonna help to keep it nice and clean. Taking a look at everything here, you can see that a good amount of filler material has kept these things together. And using a good amount of filler material is gonna also help to prevent a little bit of distortion. So this should help to prevent warping as I weld on it more. And then as I put it on my drawing here, you can kind of see the shape that it is going to start to take. A couple quick adjustments here, you're gonna see what I'm about to do next. Okay, and now I'm gonna start welding and connecting these two pieces. I'm gonna do a weld right in the middle of the two. And again, I'm gonna make sure that I get good filler material on it to combat the gross stuff that is burning off of it. Good filler material, good post flow. I'm gonna give it a quick check with the ruler here to see how straight that it stayed. It sits flat on my table. I'm pretty happy with the way it's sitting right now. And then I'm just gonna take my ruler and I'm gonna check to make sure that these two pieces stayed parallel. You can see they moved a little bit. A quick tap with the hammer will get them close to what we want. Another quick measurement here. I'm happy with this. Now I'm gonna bridge these two pieces together. Watch this. I'm basically just doing tacking here. A couple quick tacks, let the filler material cool down. Then I'm gonna continue to do this to connect these two pieces with a little bridge here. Obviously this is sped up, but when I'm happy with them being connected, I'm gonna run another little quick pass on top. This is literally welding on top of filler material. Pretty delicate stuff here. All right, taking a quick break here, check this out. I've been using this filler material, which is a pretty narrow diameter stuff here, and I'm gonna actually start to switch out to use something a little thicker now. I'm basically gonna use this stuff to start to build a skeleton that I can work on. Okay, what you can see here is I'm basically just using the filler rod. I'm arcing up on the end of it, and then once it is secure, I'm going down to the other end of it, arcing on the other end, and basically creating these little ribs that I'm gonna use to build off of. I'm gonna start out with just a handful of them, and I'm gonna try and put them as close together as I can. You can see that once I arc up, I have to arc off really quickly. It's just the best way to freeze one of these things in place. Okay, now that I've got a few done here, I'm just kind of checking my dimensions with my drawing. And then what I'm gonna actually start doing is bridging these ribs together. Again, this gets pretty precarious here. I'm basically arcing up in between each rib, and then I'm gonna try and give it filler material to bridge them together, being very careful not to melt them so they pop open. Getting filler material in as quick as possible is the easiest way to keep these things from popping apart. I'm gonna do as many bridges as I can, essentially creating like a web. You can see here how close some of these bridges are together as I continue to work on it. And I think you can imagine how tedious this can be. You're about to see me dip my tungsten about 1,000 times, don't worry. After I get these pretty close together, I'm gonna start filling them in with filler material. I basically arc up, just give it a good amount of filler and start to wash everything together to fill in the gaps in between each spot. I'm not really too concerned about how clean everything is coming out. I'm just trying to get everything filled in as much as I can. Now you can see here, I have basically completely filled in the back half of this top part. I'm not gonna fill in the webbing ahead of it, simply because that's gonna get covered over by this stuff here later on. I'm basically gonna start using filler material to fill in all of the empty spots. And then once everything is filled in, I'm gonna start washing it all together with the torch. This is gonna kind of create a uniform appearance to it. Now that I've got empty space to fill up, I'm basically just gonna dry arc up on the side of it. This is essentially where I'm doing welding with no filler material. This is not a pulse setting on the machine, I'm actually just pumping with my foot pedal. I'm running along the side, just trying to make everything look consistent. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna check the overall shape to see how it's going here. We can see that the nose of the dragon head is actually starting to turn out a little bit wide. I thought this was gonna be a little narrower. So what I'm gonna do is grab my zip disc on my grinder and I'm just gonna do a couple relief cuts on either side. What I'm gonna be able to do after I make these relief cuts is tap these in a little bit more. Okay, and at this point here, the rest of what I'm gonna do is pretty similar to the process we've done so far. With every section that I'm working on with this thing, I'm basically gonna start by building ribs to start a little frame. I then connect and fill around the ribs that I have built, and then I go about smoothing it out with the torch after. You can see this area here, I am now doing the dragon's eyes as well as the forehead, building up a nice little frame to work off of here. And then at this point here, I'm actually starting the mounting hinges. Again, I'm building a little frame. This is just gonna give me a rough little area where I'm gonna drill the holes. Later on, I'll put a bolt through this area for assembly. Now this part was really cool, check this out. Here I'm building the fins for the top of the dragon's head. I'm building them on my table separate. Once I put them together, I'm gonna start doing the same process. I'll smooth everything out, make it look kind of cool. Then you can see I'm attaching it to the full assembled head here so far. This kind of stuff where it gets really fine, putting stuff together like this is a lot of fun. It's super challenging, but it's fun. Check out this spot here. Here I'm doing the teeth. The teeth are a lot of fun. Basically, I'm just stacking up filler material as narrow as I can. Once I get things stacked up to a point where I'm happy with the height, I basically melt down one side of it. This gives it the appearance that it's sharp. I'm gonna do the same thing on top of the head for the horn. Again, I stack up the filler material and then melt down one side of it. It makes it look kind of crazy, a little bit jagged. I mean, I don't know what dragons actually look like, but I would imagine they look like that. Okay, so now that we have a bunch of our welding done, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna suit up again and go out and do some grinding. Now what I need to do is I actually need to cut some of my shapes. I'm gonna use the zip disc again for this. I have a ton of solid material around the body of this thing. So I'm basically just gonna start cutting some relief cuts in this thing. We're gonna try and make it look like fins and scales. Now when it comes to using a zip disc earlier in this video, what did I talk about? Do you remember? I will only use a zip disc that is essentially brand new. We can take a look at this one here. This is only after a little bit of use and we can already see it starting to wear pretty heavily. Look at this, look how easy it breaks. This thing would explode and go right into your skin. I have zero tolerance for stuff like this. When I see something starting to look in this kind of shape, I take it off, I get rid of it, I grab a new one. I'm trying to cut some little fins and stuff like that in this little dude. We're gonna try and give it some texture, make it look cool. And then after I do all my grinding, I'm gonna go back into the shop now. As we can see, everything looks pretty sharp after all the cutting that we just did. What I'm gonna do at this point here is I'm actually gonna use my welding torch and I'm gonna fuse over the edges. We wanna smooth this out, kind of give it a uniform look with the welding torch. I'm not gonna use any filler material here. I'm just gonna dry arc on it. We can see we're getting some gross stuff still burning off this thing, but I'm really stoked with how this one's turning out. It's looking great. Okay, so now we get to start the second half, the bottom jaw of this thing. Essentially, the game plan is pretty much the same. I'm gonna assemble the bolts similar to like I did at the top, but you can see this time I'm actually tacking them on a bit of an angle. This is gonna save me having to do those relief cuts and tapping them in again. Learn my lesson on that top half. But again, I'm gonna build this thing using all different ribs that I am now installing. I'm doing the exact same thing. I'm tacking them in to kind of give it the rough shape so it matches the drawing. I'm doing all of my bridging tacks to put everything together, filling everything in, kind of fusing it as I go. Again, I'm getting a great gray looking oxide. One thing that I actually did was I turned my gas volume down quite a bit. You can see obviously I'm using a number 10 cup. The screen on this thing is trashed at this point. The tungstens I'm using are pretty much garbage. But I like what it's doing. It's giving me a really cool look as far as it being oxidized. It looks gray, it kind of looks gross and rough. I love it. Now here's the cool part. I'm gonna start making the hinges. These have to match up with the ones that we made on the top, so I have to be careful with these. You can see I'm using the top half as a bit of a guide, exactly where I want to put the hole. I'll make that decision a little bit later, but at least I can kind of get the body of where the hinges are going to go installed, and I'm going to do it the same with building little skeletons out of filler material. Okay, now that we have the hinges roughly built and shaped the way I want, one thing I forgot to get at the store was another bolt. So I'm going to quickly measure how wide we need here. Okay, this should do it. Let's go. Oh, no way. What are those? Cool. All right, we're good. Let's go. Okay, now that I've got my bolt, it's time to drill. You can see here I am basically just using a 1/4-inch drill bit and I'm just passing through, trying to get the shape of the holes lined up roughly to what I want. I'll probably clean these up a little bit later. You can see the bolt fits through pretty good. That's good enough for now. All right, what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna punch a little hole so I can drill. Oops, there we go. All right, now I'm drilling through. I'm using a smaller bit to start with here. This is a pilot hole. Makes it a little easier once I switch to a bigger drill bit. And again, you can see smoke coming off of this. I'm using a cutting fluid. That's what the smoke is. And there we go. It's time to clean these holes up. After I've drilled them, there's a bit of a rag on them. I want to clean this up. Just gonna use a flapper wheel. This flapper wheel is pretty fine. It's gonna clean these up and these are gonna fit together really well. Okay, now here's where I encounter a problem that I need to fix. We can see that when we line the holes up, we have a bit of an underbite. What's the great thing about welding? We can always fix stuff like this. We're gonna fill the hole and we're gonna move it. As you can see, all I'm doing is basically just arcing up on the edge of this and I'm adding filler material to build it up. To be honest, this is a skill that I think a lot of beginner welders could probably stand to learn. When I was starting out, I used to fix stuff like this all the time. And then there we go, it's completely fixed. I'm moving the hole back a little bit. I'm gonna punch it again for better alignment. Here we go again with the drill. And then taking a look at it here as we pass the bolt through, this looks way better, I love it. Okay, now I need to start putting some of the ground clamp parts inside the clamp. And unfortunately, this means I have to steal some parts. Now, this is the ground clamp here that I use with one of my CanaWeld machines. I have used this thing for years, so I do not want to wreck it and take it apart. These ground clamps have a pin that has been riveted inside, so unfortunately, if I want to disassemble it, I kind of have to wreck the pin. But I do have this spare one here. It's got everything that I need inside of it. It's got a spring, so I'm going to sacrifice this one. Again, this one has another pin that is riveted, so I'm going to have to drill it out. Okay, so we got all the parts we need, and I didn't have to wreck my good clamp, which is great because now I have it as a backup in case I need to use it. Okay, this is a bit of a problem here. I'm having a heck of a time trying to get this stupid spring inside. This spring is so tight to squeeze together, I'm having a real hell of a time getting it inside of the clamp. I've tried over and over, I've sent this thing shooting across the shop. I need to think of something different here. So here's what I thought of doing, check this out. What I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna put a little tack weld just to hold it at the end here. And then I'm gonna put a couple tack welds a little further up. This is gonna keep it nice and flat. This will help me out because this way I don't have to leave the bolt in it when I press the top half down. Unfortunately, this is when the most unexpected and worst thing happened. We've got everything clamped in there nice and tight. Let's start pressing it down. Oh, that's a really big pain in the ass. You can see that it snapped off right where the tack weld was at the end. I thought this spring was going to be made of something a little more reliable. I didn't think it would just cleanly snap like that. It's probably not going to work, but let's try and weld it back together. Again, I'm adding a good amount of filler material. Hopefully this will kind of hold it in place. And here we go, let's try it again. Here we go, nice and slow. I've gone too far building this clamp. I have to finish. This is a really tough one to make a decision on, so I think I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna risk having no ground clamp on this one. So let's do it. We're gonna use this big fella here. This big spring here is gonna save this video or leave me dead in the water. Let's see. Okay, drilling it out here, the same procedure as the last one. But we can see with this one, I actually was able to take it apart a little bit and sneak the spring out of the side without completely disassembling it. Now I'm using my cutting disc again. I gotta remove this stupid broken one that's stuck inside here and clean it up. I'm gonna gently remove it and put it in the trash safely. All right, I'm just gonna use a bit of filler to fix up a couple of the grind marks I just did. What's going on here? Oh, for God's sakes. That's right, I don't have a ground clamp. But check this out. Because this thing didn't completely come apart when I took the spring out, I'm just using a spare bolt. And I'm passing it through, I'm just gonna tighten it up. There's absolutely no spring tension on the inside of this thing anymore, but I'm gonna use this clamp. Once again, thank you to Strong Hand Tools for saving me on this one. And I'm gonna clamp the ground clamp down. Hey, right on, there we go. And then here's where I actually had a bit of an epiphany. Before I was tacking the spring into the bottom jaw, because I thought this might just be fine, but it actually was putting a little bit more flex on the bottom, and it was really hard to press down. What if I tacked it to the top half instead? That way I could just press down like this. It gives me a better angle. But this time I'm just gonna put a tack weld right on the end here. I'm not gonna do any halfway up. I don't trust what these things are made of anymore, so I'm gonna play it safe on this one. Now you can see with this on, I'm actually doing a bit of a bridging tack across. I'm not putting as much trust to actually weld on the spring itself. You can see the little bridging tack goes across and kind of holds it in. I'm now taking a piece of filler material. Check this trick out. I'm tacking it across and it's gonna kind of hold this thing in so that as I press down, it's not gonna flex up. And again, I'm not risking doing any welding on the spring itself. So this might be a nice way that we can kind of brace it in and get best of both worlds. All right, before I get going here, there's one thing that I need to do. I need to make sure I have enough clearance for the actual ground wire to pass through. I'm gonna cut a hole for this later, but because this spring is a little bit bigger, I need to make sure that it fits underneath. That's why clearing it out with the grinder is gonna give me this room. It's gonna work out perfectly. Okay, here is the moment that I've been waiting for. I've been trying to get back to this point for a few hours now. Okay, I'm trying to get it lined up as close as I can, pushing it down nice and slow. As you can see here, it was really hard to film because I had to hold this thing down with my dear life. It's lined up, quick, get the bolt in. All right, we got half of it, lock it down with a clamp, and let's finish this thing. I'm gonna ream out the holes just for a little bit of extra clearance, why the hell not? Pass the bolt through, there we go, it's through all the way. I stayed patient, I treated this thing with respect, and I'm thankful of the journey that it gave me to accomplish this. Oh! Okay, getting a quick nut on the other side here. I can now take my clamp off, let's check it out. Spring-loaded jaws, those look awesome. Clamps onto the table. Okay, now it is time to install the hardware. I'm marking this out as best as I can. I need to leave myself a bit of wiggle room in case these pieces don't line up perfectly. And again, I'm gonna drill this out with a small pilot hole first for good alignment. And I'm gonna hit it with the actual size that I need. And then we can start passing the pieces through and we can connect the wire. I'm just gonna do this up loosely for now just to hold the ground lead in place. And then here, we run into another problem. Check this out. The screw that I have for the top half is too frickin' short. We can see there is still a considerable amount of material this thing needs to reach. I got some ideas on how to take care of this one in the bank upstairs. Check this out. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna countersink this so that the top of the bolt actually sits much lower. I'm using a big old drill bit, but then here's the second problem. Once it sits down in this actual hole, I'm not gonna have room to get a socket in there to hold it in place while I tighten it up. Once again, I got a sneaky way to take care of this problem. Big shout out to my friend Stu who taught me this one back in the day. My friend Stu taught me if you can't get something on it, try and get something in it. Check this out. We're gonna cut a slot right in the middle and we're gonna use a screwdriver. Simple as hell, but this is gonna work awesome. Watch this. Passing all the pieces through here. I got the little bracket on the inside. And there it is, there's the screwdriver. We're tightening it up. It reaches no problem. Now I gotta get this stupid copper braiding through. I basically just need to tuck it underneath this piece of hardware and tighten the hell out of it. Make sure it doesn't go anywhere. Then I'm gonna pass the braiding through to the other side and lock that side down nice and tight now. And there we go, we frickin' finally did it. You can see everything is locked up nice and tight in place. The braiding is tucked away under the hardware perfectly. We can see the head of the screw is buried nice and deep in there. It's all good. So now it is time to hook this thing back up to the machine. Everything connects and hooks up just like normal. But as I start to turn the machine on, get everything ready to go, start putting my gear on, I'm super nervous that at this point here, after all the work I put into it, it's not gonna work. But here we go, I'm all set. Flip the mask down, hit the pedal to initiate the arc, and yes, it frickin' works. This one was an absolute head scratcher to build, even though it was relatively straightforward, but I learned a ton doing it. I have a...
Dinner's ready.
Dinner's ready. Dinner's ready. I have a badass new ground clamp for my welding machine to hook onto my dope table here. Everybody knows me, I can't do anything without throwing my own personal touch on it, and you should definitely try this project out. You can make whatever you want, just make it cool, and most of all, have fun doing it. Happy welding.